Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Bohemian News for today, the 13th of March, 2021. I wish I had some good news for you all, but it has honestly been nothing but bad news coming out here in the Czech Republic and in the local region. This part of Europe itself has had lots of bad news, just to be quite honest. Um, I gotta say, after going through all of these articles this week and reading everything again and again, I gotta say, there is a special place in hell for many of the politicians in the European Union. The things that they've done, the hardships they have created with their policies over the past year. Let's get on with it, shall we? So, we're going to start with business news today. Um, as you can see here, the headline's pretty simple. Czech beer sales plummet during COVID lockdowns. Now, if you don't know, the Czech Republic, for about the last 20 years, if I remember correctly, has been the #1 per capita consumer of beer on the planet. Okay? The Czechs love their beer. And they do make some really fantastic beer here. Um, so this is a massive blow to the nation's economy. Okay, there are breweries all over this country. The most famous probably being Pilsner. Um, so if the sales are dropping, that's tax revenue the government's not getting. That's money that's not going back to the people to help during this lockdown. They're creating a cycle in which the GDP drops, tax revenue drops, but they're trying to give money to people. How can you do that? You can't. There is no money to give unless you just print more and more and more. Oh, inflation. Wonderful. Thank you so much. So let's check this article real quick. So, home to the world's first Pilsner, the Czech Republic is internationally known as having the highest beer consumption per capita, a title held for over 20 years. As the pandemic has ravaged the tourism and gastronomy industries, beer purchases have also seen a sharp decline throughout the past year. Recently released data from the Czech General Directorate of Customs revealed that beer consumption decreased by 13 liters per capita last year. This works out to the average Czech drinking about 129 liters of beer in 2020, falling by 14% from the pre-pandemic era. This drastic decline in beer consumption can likely be attributed to the series of government-mandated closures during each wave of the pandemic since March of last year. While alcohol consumption in general went up during 2020, much less beer was being purchased than usual, as many were deprived of opportunities for draft beer and resorted to drinking at home. Kegs have always accounted for the majority of beer sales, far outpacing the sale of bottles and cans. With no mass gatherings for beer festivals, pubs and restaurants closing, and a compulsory lockdown in place, the demand for beer has steadily declined over the past year. Now I want you to really pay attention to that one sentence right here. Alcohol consumption went up during 2020. It just wasn't beer. So more people are drinking hard liquor than what they would normally drink a beer. Normally after work, you go out with the guys, you have a couple of beers, you go home, fine. They're not doing that now. Now they're going to their local grocery store and loading up on local whiskeys or brandy and stuff like that. Great. Alcoholism. Wonderful. The findings from the GDC also noted that the pandemic forced many breweries to reduce and even suspend their production as demand had dropped off. A number of government security measures complicate not only the production process in domestic breweries, but also, for example, logistics. Significantly smaller amounts of beer will reach not only the on-trade segment, meaning gastronomy, inns, restaurants, etc., but also hypermarkets, supermarkets, and others. All right. As the country remains in lockdown, and the government enacts a ban on public consumption of alcohol, we can expect to see beer sales fall even further. Many pubs, like Zlichassi in Nusle, have had to adapt to survive the closures and open a takeaway window, e-shop, and other delivery options. These efforts, however, only produce a fraction of their previous sales. Yeah, Zlichassi is fantastic. It's a 3-story pub, and I promise you, every time I've been there, it's always been packed. You have to reserve a seat. If it's a Friday or Saturday, you're not getting in there without a reservation. That place was always packed. Great food, and they have the biggest selection of beer I've ever seen in my life. Like 30 or 40 different beers, depending upon which floor of the pub you go to. It's great. So it's pretty sad. I hope they don't close because it is a fantastic pub restaurant to visit. I'll probably have to go back there when everything's finished. I'm going to go there and have a couple of beers. So let's continue with this business theme for now. So here we have a new article about farmers markets because under the regulations here in the Czech Republic, farmers markets are all banned. They are forbidden. Now, in the Czech Republic, you can find farmers markets all the time in spring and summer, early fall. They're everywhere. Any major square in a city, there is going to be a farmers market on like a Saturday or a Sunday. It's like clockwork, but not now. They're considered not essential. And that's what I like about this article, because they're making the argument that they are essential. They are selling food, fruit, vegetables, etc. Some of them you can go to and they sell lots of homemade goods, arts and crafts, jewelry, homemade herbal remedies for medicine, which, that's considered an essential product. All the pharmacies are open, but not farmers markets. So I'm really hoping they win this kind of government fight. As you can see here in the picture, this is a normal farmer's market. This is just a small corner of a farmer's market. It's actually quite big. I know this location, and you can see here this one little booth here, this kiosk is just loaded with flowers. Over here you got some fruits and vegetables. It looks like they're selling some probably some homemade squeezed juice right here. Over here it looks like maybe some books. You can find just about anything at these local farmers markets here. So it just seems a bit strange that they're considered non-essential. So let's go through this real quick. The Association of Farmers Markets has sent an appeal to the government, which included detailed plans of how open-air markets could be run. However, its plea to reopen under strict hygienic conditions has been met with stony silence while bankruptcy looms for small family-run businesses. Small farmers are already under pressure due to the closure of hotels, restaurants, and catering, which makes up the majority of direct sales. Closing farmers markets will have a further dramatic impact on small producers, says the chairman of the Association of Farmers Markets, Mr. Sedlacek. Market operators argue that markets should be treated as essential services on par with grocery stores and pharmacies, and I fully agree. If they're selling food and they're selling medicines, they're essential. Why are they being forced to close? From the very beginning of the announcement of measures to combat the spread of coronavirus, we feel discriminated. While all food retailers, whether small stores or hypermarkets, are open without restrictions, farmers markets had to stay closed. Producers who supply goods to the markets are harmed. The main focus of the markets is selling food. Moreover, outside, where, according to experts, shopping is safer than in air-conditioned stores. Absolutely right. Farmers who sell at markets often have multiple streams of income, but for some, the market itself is the farm's economic backbone. Quote, up to 300 family farms are selling at various Prague sites during the season. Alternative methods such as deliveries through e-shops will not save the small operators, as the profit would be marginal and conditions exhausting. Market produce is likely to be, quote, unsuitable to be transferred to supermarkets, especially in terms of packaging and labeling requirements. Yeah, In case you don't know, the EU has so many strict requirements on packaging and labeling of food and just about everything. It's kind of ridiculous. They talk about trying to save the planet and reducing plastic, but when you go to a grocery store, you'll see half the fruit and vegetables wrapped in friggin' plastic. It defeats the whole point. They're idiots. They don't know what the hell they're doing. Now we got to change the topic a little bit. Of course, we got to go into the coronavirus and what's going on. So on Thursday night, I saw this article and it really kind of stood out to me. A 50-year-old man shot himself in front of the Ministry of Health. This was Thursday night. Killed himself. It just says shot himself, but no, he blew his fucking brains out. Right there in front of the Ministry of Health. And the reason why I say this really stood out to me, there was a now famous man, I believe his name was Jan Palach, here in the Czech Republic. And I don't remember the exact year. I should have looked this up. But during the communist years, he set himself on fire at Wenceslas Square, another big famous square in the middle of Prague. He went there right next to the statue of Saint Wenceslas and set himself on fire as a protest to the communists and the Communist Party and their socialist agenda. And he did it in a very open, very public place, like Wenceslas Square. That was the point. You couldn't ignore it. And I think this man had the same idea. He went right there into the front of their doors, blew his brains out. So when those assholes had to go to work Friday morning, his blood was right there on the ground. They had to walk over the remnants of this man's corpse, basically. And I hope it sends a message. I really do. I hope other people don't have to make this kind of a statement. If one life, people in the United States that talk about it, if it means saving one life, right? When they want to bitch about gun control. Well, here you go. This was one life because of the lockdowns. That's why he chose to do it in front of the Ministry of Health. They're the ones that are declaring everything to be closed and forcing the lockdowns. It's the Ministry of Health. So we'll go through this really quickly. It's a pretty short article. So here it says, according to witnesses interviewed by a reporter, the man arrived in front of the ministry by tram. Then he headed to the ministry entrance where he pulled out a gun and pointed it at himself. A man with no signs of life was found in Palatsky Square. Police have determined that the man suffered a gunshot wound that he inflicted on himself. Therefore, criminologists have ruled out the fault of another person. Yeah, no shit. Emergency services could do nothing to help the man, aged 50. We sent an ambulance and an inspector to the scene. We found a man with a gunshot wound, which, unfortunately, was not compatible with life. Yeah, that's kind of how it happens when you blow your fucking brains out. Geniuses. The coroner went to the scene. You may as well send a fucking hearse. I don't normally like to cuss so much, but this kind of stuff just pisses me off. This whole past year during the pandemic, whether you're in the United States or Canada or Europe, it doesn't matter. The same arguments have been made. We have to save one life. You want to open things up. You want to kill grandma. Now, people are fucking killing themselves because of the lockdown. You want to save lives? Open up. Get the vaccines out. Open up. Let people live a somewhat normal life. How do I know this is leading to suicide? Watch this. This article was published on last Monday, March 8th, titled, "They Just Decide to Die. Viral isolation crushes seniors mentally." A year of isolation and constant fear of infection the epidemic also takes its toll on the mental health of the elderly. There are more and more of those who are thinking about how they would end their lives, and even those who actually try. Before the epidemic began, the 67-year-old senior from Schumperk was used to regular visits from her family. However, when the first cases of COVID-19 appeared in the Czech Republic, the daughter and grandchildren stopped driving. She was afraid they would infect the woman. They kept in touch only by phone. The isolation of the elderly woman turned out so severely that she attempted suicide. She overdosed on the medication she was taking, but because she had contacted her daughter, who immediately called emergency services, the worst didn't happen. Due to the short time after taking the medication and a gastric pump, the woman was saved. All right, good. After improving the elderly woman's condition and being released from the hospital, her daughter took her in, and this visibly increased the patient's appetite for life, which the previous isolation had completely deprived her of. This story has a happy ending, but it's certainly not the only one. Suicide attempts are on the rise among seniors. You want to help grandma? You want to save grandma? Open the fucking country. What do you think grandma gives a shit about? 2 more years of her life or seeing her grandkids? If you still believe in the lockdowns and you're still advocating for it, you are a moron. You are killing people. Blood is directly on your hands. We'll continue down here on this part of the article called The Devastating Impact of Loneliness. In spite of all this, suicide attempts are just the tip of the iceberg. Even if seniors do not want to touch their lives, loneliness and poor mental state will take their toll. We often find that people simply give up. They no longer want to live, and the way they go mentally has a direct impact on their physical health. They just decide to die. This is the case, for example, of a pensioner from Olomouc. Her husband died 2 years ago after battling cancer, and since most of her family lives on the other side of the country, she was left alone in a large apartment. By the time the epidemic came, she had handled the situation. She regularly went for coffee and wine with friends, participated in activities organized by the local senior home, or went to the library and read. However, when the Czech Republic first closed, the situation began to deteriorate. She couldn't suddenly spend time with friends. She was afraid of illness, and every day after waking up, she was plagued by anxiety. The situation escalated in April, when one day after waking up, she could not move at all. All she could do was call an ambulance, and at the hospital, the doctors determined that the problems were of psychosomatic origin. She says, "Then I started seeing a psychiatrist and taking pills. She told me that it was also the impact of several years of burdens related to her husband's illness. Her relatives then decided to take her in regardless of the epidemic risk." Mental health problems can cause such a deterioration in physical health that they can lead to death. The most serious was probably in the nursing homes, where some of them were all alone in the room and were not allowed to leave. We get calls from people who feel very lonely and therefore their health deteriorates. At the same time, we also know about death statistics in nursing homes, which have changed not only as a result of COVID, but also as a result of social isolation. The situation is now all the worse because we are going through the so-called third quarter phenomenon. It refers to a situation characterized by a seemingly gratuitous deterioration in mood, morale, and performance, which occurs after half of a task or even a crisis situation. At such a moment, exhaustion occurs, but at the same time, the vision of the end is still too distant. We observe that even those who were active last autumn and kept a positive mind are already losing their optimism. Many of them have relied on a solution in the form of vaccinations, but we can already see the vaccination is not up to date. Currently, 78% of people over the age of 80 who have registered for vaccination have received the first dose of the vaccine. Both doses were received by 21% of people in this age category. There are about 440,000 people over the age of 80 in the Czech Republic, but only about half have registered. Seniors make up the most at-risk group. The average age of those who succumb to the disease is 79 years. And what's the big problem with that? Why is it so slow to get this vaccine here in the Czech Republic? What the hell is going on? If there are only about 440,000 people over the age of 80, how is it taking so long to get them vaccinated? That's a small percentage of the nation. Well, let's take a look at this. Czech Republic calls for fair distribution of vaccines. What the hell is going on? What do you mean, fair distribution? Isn't it being done fairly? Apparently not. As I said a few weeks ago, I believe in Bohemian News episode 2, the Czech Republic is considerably below the per capita average of vaccines and vaccinations in the EU. Now here's the problem. That should automatically stand out. If the vaccines are being distributed fairly and injected in a fair manner, the elderly and the sick get their vaccine first, then shouldn't the per capita of all the EU be roughly the same if it's fair? The leaders of Austria, Slovenia, the Czech Republic, Latvia, and Bulgaria are calling for talks among European Union leaders about the distribution of vaccines within the 27-nation bloc. Notice where all those countries are. Go get a map. These countries over here, Central to Eastern Europe, they're like flyover states back in the U.S. Kansas, Iowa, Missouri. No one gives a shit about them. No one cares. Because it's not the big dogs. It's not New York. It's not California. It's not Texas. It's not Germany. It's not France. So no one gives a shit. And they get screwed over again and again. There's a reason why some of these countries are talking about leaving the EU. 2 or 3 years ago, there was a call for a Czechit, for the Czech Republic to exit the EU. Quite heated debates in the Czech parliament, as a matter of fact. Obviously, it didn't happen, but perhaps after this, there will be some more discussions about it. But let's go over this little article real quick. So, Austrian media reported Saturday that the 5 leaders wrote a joint letter to European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and European Council President Charles Michel. Yeah, there you go. You got a Dutch and a frickin' French. There's your problem. That came after Austrian Chancellor Sebastian Kurz complained on Friday that even though the EU had agreed on the distribution of the vaccines on a per capita basis, some countries were receiving considerably more than others. There you go. Black and white. The EU is screwing over the smaller countries. I wonder how much money is changing hands in the parliament up in Brussels. How much money is being distributed to make sure that those vaccines go to certain locations and they don't get to other locations. Now, obviously, I have no proof. I have no evidence. I'm just wondering. I wouldn't be surprised. The letter asserted that, quote, if this system were to carry on, it would continue creating and exacerbating huge disparities among member states by this summer, end quote. OE1 Radio reported that its General Secretary Ines Stilling said negotiations on distributing the vaccines had been balanced and transparent. Yeah, negotiations on distributing the vaccines. Negotiations, not the actual distribution of the vaccines. That obviously has not been balanced and transparent. It's obvious. If it was all balanced, like I said before, the per capita number of vaccines in the population all across the EU would be roughly the same. There would not be such a blatant, obvious difference between, let's say, Germany and their per capita vaccinations and the Czech Republic, who are literally neighbors. And there is a huge difference. Go look at my Bohemian News episode 2. I showed a chart, I had a graph. You can see it yourself. There's a massive difference. France is the same. They also have a very high per capita vaccination rate right now. Alright guys, I think that's about as much as I can handle. I'm really about to lose it. It's pissing me off just reading this stuff again. It's getting my blood pressure up, man. It's driving me crazy. Like, it's obvious corruption. It's obvious. Something is going on. There is no reason that this should be happening. As I said earlier in this video, there is a special place in hell waiting for these EU politicians. The sooner they get there, maybe the better off we will all be. So I guess the only thing left to say is, thanks for watching. Until next time, I remain the Neo-Bohemian.